Chapter 3 A Day at the Races. There were a few clouds, but the day was going to be mostly sunny, so again, I had to go out under a blanket and switch to an umbrella when we got out of the car at the edge of the parking lot. "You sure the sun would burn you that bad?" Brown asked, holding the umbrella for me while I got out before I took control of it. "The Puerto Rican vampiress I saw go up in flames was darker than I am," I told him. "It's magic, not melanin. And here I thought maybe I could live forever without any downside." Brown's voice was dry enough. I knew he wasn't that stupid, but still. "I don't call this living. And you'd miss garlic even if you could have the sun." Oh, how I missed garlic, and eating in general. We headed to the entrance to the racetrack. It was popular enough to be a little on the crowded side. As we began to mingle among the spectators, I was struck by how much more I could hear as a vampire than I ever had to deal with as a human. The ruffling sound of paper as people looked at the race schedules, the form books, private notebooks, and tip sheets they bought off of shady insiders, real or scam. Heartbeats, some calmly enjoying themselves, others thumping along with anxiety. One man bumped into me. "Hey," I told him, "don't do it. If you can't afford the loss, don't bet it." "Mister, I don't know who you are, but I can't afford not to win." He dodged through the crowd toward the betting windows. I shook my head, but at the same time, I got it. Maybe he had to make up for a mistake. Maybe he had some legitimate loan due or needed to pay for his child's hospital bill. A 6-1 win might be the difference between comfort and catastrophe. Maybe he'd get lucky, and maybe he'd learn something. A group of 6 women walked past to take seats a few rows back on the risers. They smelled delicious. In fact, I realized my mouth had been watering for a while. The smell of food was all around me. I don't mean the popcorn and the hot dogs. I mean the human scent which, along with their heartbeats, was pummeling my senses. I was jostled again. This time it was a big guy, and he wasn't bothering to look or apologize. I saw him raise his arm a little to help him push past a Greek family looking for a place to sit. I reached out faster and gripped his shoulder. "You don't have to be a jerk," I said softly as his head swiveled to see what he was caught on, and he made eye contact. "Screw you," he sneered. I put pressure on the shoulder and saw him start to turn white. I let go, worried. I had felt a moment of temptation, his fear goading me. I wanted to bite him. I wanted to bite someone. There was so much life around me, so many dancing auras full of energy. The many heartbeats made an orchestra of soft percussion playing different rhythms. The appetizing aroma of humans mixed with perfume, butter, and the horrible hint of garlic from the hot dogs. I stepped up the stairs along the risers, going for higher seats, further from the track, but also getting me more space from all those people. I was a danger to them, but it also felt like I was in danger from them. Too many people, too oblivious, too much chaos. I didn't know how to handle it. Brown's voice came from behind me. He was following me. That was okay. Somehow, I think even the vampire side of me had decided friends are not food. He asked, "Raph, what's wrong with your hand?" I looked at the hand I'd grabbed the pushy guy with. No problem that I could see. It had stayed in the shade. In fact, I'd reached for his shoulder rather than his wrist to avoid the sun. "Not that one." I changed what hand my umbrella was in, and as I did, I could see what he meant. There was blood on that hand. My fingernails had grown longer and sharper as I'd gotten stressed. With my hand closed around the umbrella handle, they had punctured my palm. As I held it open, the curved wound started to heal. The marks would be gone in mere minutes, but it was unsettling. I haven't been in this much of a crowd for this long since I died. The closest thing had been some subway trips, but there were more controls. I could predict what to expect, and there'd been no sun to make me afraid for my safety. It's a little overwhelming. I remembered that my blood could be an anti-life contagion and licked up the dark blood before it could drip. Brown gestured to an empty row. "Let's sit there for now. I'd like for us to be closer and be able to talk to people, but not until you're ready." "Right." I looked at my aura. It wasn't as bad as when I was almost slain by a mobster, a guy named Nick Durante, who had encountered a vampire before and mistaken me for the baddie at our first meeting. But the color in my aura, the part that showed I still had a soul, was swirling in sluggish eddies, not flowing naturally. "It's already looking better," said Brown, who could read even more layers and details of auras than I could. "I think I can get used to the crowds," I said, "as long as I don't push it too hard. Taking breaks from the press of it when I need to, that should do it. As long as nothing really shocking happens." So we watched the first race from 2/3 of the way up the stands, but it was a good enough view, and I made mental notes of the number of horses running, what officials were visible out on the field, and how the crowd surged up to the rail as the race came underway. There was a movement at my side and a man sat down. "I thought snoops were supposed to try to be inconspicuous." I locked eyes with Durante. Of all the people for me to meet when coming off a bad mood. His world-weary face was animated with curiosity, though. "The umbrella?" I said casually. "It looks odd when it isn't raining, but it would be more conspicuous if I were on fire." Durante gave a little laugh. "Yeah, they might notice you then, although maybe not, depending upon how much money they have on the current race. Is that what you're here for? Betting on the horses?" "You might say I'm here for the gambling, yes, and to look in on a few business interests in the area. I imagine something more serious has brought you out of the shadows, though." He lit up a cigarette and began to smoke. Brown shot him a glance. "This guy a friend of yours?" "Ah, he's the one responsible for the alterations in my suit when you and I first started working together." The bullet holes and bloodstains had not improved it. "We are currently in a state of detente. He was a criminal, I was a former policeman, still seeking to serve just causes. He'd managed to slay a vampire, no small feat as I knew, and I didn't really mind that he tried to kill me, given that I was unique in being a vampire who didn't prey on people. In turn, the fact that I hadn't harmed the goons he'd sent to dispose of my body had convinced him I wasn't a menace, at least for now. Not friends, but not enemies either. What I'm wondering," Durante brought up, "is what could possibly bring you all the way out of the city, and in this kind of weather? It must be something serious." "Dead serious," I told him. "I see. This isn't exactly my turf, but I have a stake in keeping this area safe. Has it already happened, or has someone been getting threats? I haven't seen any murder in the papers around here." "That's because they aren't being reported as such. A string of drownings." He frowned. "These waters are peaceful. That shouldn't happen much." "That's what the coroner thinks. Needs evidence it's not just bad luck or a mental health issue, though." "Why are you at the track? Shouldn't you be waiting around for clues?" "Ha ha. I've been looking into common factors, and the first thing that seems to be common to all of them, besides being women in an age range likely to be of interest to many men, is that they all seem to have something to do with horses or riding. And this is the most famous spot locally for horses." "That's about it," I conceded. "You don't have a lead. You're looking for a lead on getting a lead. You need better than this." He thought a moment. "Give me the names and I'll check in with a few people." "Oh, no can do, Snoopy. Well, if not the names of your sources, can you tell me why you're going to ask them?" He gave a slight nod. "Off-track bookmakers. It might be good to know if the victims have any outstanding debts. And some women have a second job, the kind they don't want their families to know about. That business is mostly fake names, but there's a few people who might know something useful." Brown spoke up. "They sound like pretty shady characters." "They are. Even the ones doing nothing illegal have a lot of contact with the ones who do. But I know who they are, and I can get more out of them than a stranger could, especially one who stands like a cop." "Talking to shady characters goes with both our lines of work," I said softly. "But just to ease Brown's mind, can you tell him why you want the killer caught?" Durante gave a tight smile. "My business interests here are connected to the tourist trade and the entertainment and hospitality industries. If rumor gets around about a murderer on the loose, it could be bad for morale and chase away customers." "Well, we wouldn't want that," Brown said, still not happy about this assistance. It wasn't comfortable for me either. Durante might mean to help now, but what if the culprit turned out to be someone he was doing business with? His profits could easily outweigh his public spirit. However, there was a rule to detective work that Brown needed to learn. We have to have information before we can evaluate it, and any intel is good intel if it's evaluated correctly. I'm happy to have help. I wrote down the names for him. He took the paper and told me, "I've heard good things about Blue Streak in the 7th. You might as well bet if you're here. I've got people to meet with now, and you do too. After you hit the betting windows, there's another route you can take to head toward where the real action is. They don't exactly welcome people who don't have business there, but I reckon you can think of something better than an evening arborist this time." He gave me directions, hit me lightly on the shoulder, and headed off. I turned to Brown. "You up for a flutter? I'm talking a blue streak here." "You up to the crowds?" "Sure, as long as I can get some fresh air after." "You want to figure out an excuse to sneak into the horse trailers or stables or whatever they have?" "That's a fact. I'm thinking of flashing the badge and saying I heard there was off-track betting going on." "They might ask for a warrant." "Not unless there really is, and it seems unlikely since the general public isn't supposed to go there. It's a great excuse because we'll get to talk to a lot of people." He saw my logic but declined to bet himself. "Betting doesn't make sense mathematically." "I don't play the odds. I play my instincts. Or in this case, I'm just doing it for the experience." "You want the experience of throwing away $2? Be my guest." "Just for that, I'm going to throw away 2 more on 1 for you. Same again, or have you seen something you like?" He hesitated. "My mom doesn't approve of gambling. The church doesn't approve of it." "Just think about it," I said, but he was already scanning the program. "They actually have one called Baptist Choice." "Let me guess. That's your church." He nodded. I told him at the window I wanted 2 on Baptist Choice in the 8th. Heading around the side passage that Durante had told us about, I tried the line I'd planned about investigating. I didn't even get as far as saying what the investigation was of. The guy watching the door just asked to see the badge and then pointed the way with his thumb. Not that I needed help seeing where to go. He'd given the badge a real look, which was good, but also suggested both real and fake officers came this way often enough for him to know what he was doing. Up front, unless the race was underway, the crowd was constantly full of action and the track wore a placid air. A few officials had walked around, monitoring the condition of the track and so on, and the horses were walked to the starting posts in full view of the public so people could watch their gait and manner before the windows closed for betting. Just out of sight, though, the jockeys, grooms, trainers, and who knew what else were in a whirlwind of activity. The horses were being checked over, warmed up, or for those who had just finished their run, cooled down. One jockey nearby wasn't working directly with his horse, but doing stretches wearing a garish orange and white outfit typical of the riders. "Is that necessary?" I asked. "Ever ridden at full gallop?" I shook my head and he continued, "You have to move along with the horse or you're going to be really sore. The horses are running, but we have to be athletes too. All of us riders are in better shape than your average baseball player, I bet ya." "Speaking of betting, have you had any pretty girls ask you for tips?" "I'm looking into some irregularities, Mr. Lucas," he told me. "Lucas Ferris. Sure, I have a few ask, but I know the rules. There are plenty of unwritten ones as well as the official ones. If someone has told you one of us is selling tips, it's not me. Probably not any of the young guys like me either. We've got a whole career ahead of us." He leaned in. "The older ones, older than you, Pops, some of them don't have a lot of years left in the saddle. If someone's risking their place on a pretty face or for money, I think you should look there." "I'm actually more interested in finding out about the girls. Any of them come back here?" At first Lucas said no, then he reckoned that the veterinary gal did and might have had questions, but then probably not. When she talked to him, she just wanted to know about how the horse was acting and to check off his medical record. Very professional. I asked about the photographers. Oh right, he'd seen one. She was grouping owners and jockeys with horses for some photos. There was going to be an article in Town or Country on the racing scene. He'd been in a couple of the shots. He hadn't thought of her as pretty because she was a little old for him, but he supposed she was all right at that. Had she talked to him? Just to tell him to stand a bit more to the left, now turn right a bit, touch the muzzle, smile. Had she talked to anyone else? Yes, but as far as he knew, they'd all gotten the same treatment. Deliveries? Not that he could think of. His trainer was too well prepared. You'd need an emergency situation to order supplies delivered to the track instead of bringing your own. I thanked him and moved on. He didn't seem to be much of an observer. Next up was a trainer, Adam Hennessy, taking a quick cigarette break away from the animals and the straw. Women didn't come around this side of things much, he told us, adding that generally people didn't. He couldn't remember any specific exceptions. He'd not worked with the veterinarian at the track, and his stable wasn't in the area. The one back home was a Dr. Frank Herman. The ones outside the local region weren't much worth questioning, I decided. The earliest drownings that Ethel was concerned about were from May, and the local racing season didn't start until July. That made it a bit quicker to go around. I wasn't even just focusing on the answers at this point. I was watching how they acted, both in their responses to me and interactions with each other and their animals. I was looking for hidden hostility, or someone to show a little too much interest in the matter of me asking about the women. "I've been watching their auras," Brown said to me. "So have I, but you can see more. Caught anything interesting?" "Most suspicious thing I've seen so far is Durante." "You mean how he's full of anger?" "Yeah. There's something simmering in him, but he doesn't need to murder women for kicks to let it loose. Besides, one of those drownings happened on a night I know for a fact he was on Long Island. Let it go." "I just want to know why he's like that." "He came back late from World War I told him, and the Spanish flu had hit his family. I did some research after our encounter. He'd volunteered young and come back to find everyone he loved was dead. I needed a little perspective on him myself. We can't all turn to crime just because life doesn't deal cards fairly." Just then we came up to a trainer walking one of the horses, watching its feet. "Excuse me," I said. He stopped the horse, knelt down, took out a file like you'd find in a toolbox, and started working on the edge of the horse's hoof. "Excuse me," I said again. He continued to ignore me. I knelt down next to him. "I need you to answer a few questions." He glanced at me quickly and looked away. A jockey in line was walking towards us. "Howard doesn't like to talk to strangers," he said quickly. "Can I help you?" "Does Howard ever talk to girls?" "He calls his mother every week," Lime Green said. "And he talks to children sometimes. There are schools and camps that come to the stables a few times a year. I don't suppose those are the kind of girls you mean." "No, I suppose I really mean young women," I agreed. Howard snuck me a glance and shook his head quickly as he looked away again. He finished filing the hoof and ran his hand along the horse's leg. He stood up and began to walk it again. I guessed we were all walking together. "Howard's not very friendly in general, is he?" I asked. "He's fine once he knows a person, and he's wonderful with animals. I think our horses would do anything for him. If he wasn't too big, he'd ride them himself." "I've noticed you jockeys all seem to be kind of on the small side," I agreed. "What's that about?" He looked astonished. "You really don't know much about racing, do you? Every pound of a jockey's weight is more strain on the horse. Acceleration equals force divided by mass. I remembered Eugene telling me once when he was explaining why he was trying hard to reduce weight on a design for a wheelchair. The lighter something was, the easier it was to accelerate. And acceleration was everything in a short race. "Why aren't the jockeys women then?" Now he really looked aghast. "Are you kidding me? It's a man's sport. How is a woman going to control all this?" He patted the horse's flank. "Women ride all the time," Brown said. "This isn't a Sunday pony club," Lime Green sneered. "Women aren't capable of competing at this level, and even if they could, it would just be the wrong venue for them." Women, WASPs, controlled fighter planes as test pilots to get prototypes validated for use in the field. My own girl, Clara, had been active in covert operations, could do more than hold her own in a fight, and was now an agent for both Interpol and Witch Hunters, an organization specializing in controlling supernatural forces. They could certainly handle the horses running today, except maybe for one. I ducked around a little to try and get a good look at the horse's teeth, but they weren't showing. I thanked Lime Green for his information instead of collaring him and giving him a lecture on respect for the fair sex, and took down his name, which turned out to be Leon Green, not far from my mental label for him. Howard was Howard Dustin, and I noted them in their stable for follow-up, since it was local, and I wasn't sure I liked the way either of them thought of women. But just as we were walking away, Howard touched Brown's arm and whispered something to him. Brown nodded and walked away. "What was that?" "He said his sister could outrace Leon any day of the week." We laughed. Another trainer, Chance Palmer, told us it sounded like our inquiry was about a local matter and locals would deal with locals. He handed us a copy of a turf guide from last year to help us research the teams. They weren't called teams, but this sport was so jargon-filled, I'd rather use a term I knew was wrong than one that meant something else and I didn't know it. By teams, I mean knowing what trainers, jockeys, owners, and whatever other staff went together, what horses were with them, and where they came from. The start sounded, and the horses that were on the track were off and running. We'd had a better view from the stands, but nevertheless, you could see a lot of attention turning toward the course and the announcer on the speakers. We might as well listen with the rest of them, as a badge only really gives limited authority, and if someone didn't want to talk, I couldn't press the matter. Given that we were looking for a lead on a lead, voluntary cooperation was all we could look for at the moment. The race turned out to be the 7th, and after some back and forth with Pinup and Lady of the Lake, Blue Streak finished ahead by a nose. I smiled and then dropped it as I hoped that the tip had been a lucky guess and not that I'd won off a rigged race. I shook my head. It had sounded like a fair race. The only reason I was being suspicious was because Durante was involved with the kind of people who did things like fix fights. Looking around, I saw nothing but normal levels of disgruntlement or joy at the outcome. I let it go and started making the rounds again. The incoming jockeys gave us more people to speak to, while a few of the ones who were in preparation began to make their way to the starting gates. "Hey, which one is Bactiff's choice?" Brown had to ask. A chestnut horse with a lighter mane was pointed out. He looked at me, I smiled and nodded, and he headed back to the stand so he could have his religious experience. I opened the guidebook. The other horses the owner had that would be running in Saratoga included Catholic Saint, Speaking in Tongues, and Guardian Angel. The owner was local, John Stephenson. I went over to talk with the trainer Eric Johann. "You got a horse in this race?" I noted for an opener. "I got horses in a few. What's it to you?" "Who's the veterinarian?" "Well, that's really none of your—" I showed him the badge. "Oh, well, we called in David Wells recently. We lost our regular vet last month." "Drowned, didn't she?" "Yes. That surprised me. She was having a very busy week. I saw her 2 days before. With the racing season, summer visitors at dude ranches and county fair coming up, she had a lot of calls to make and preferred to do them in the morning before the heat made everything more difficult. I don't see her messing about in the lake, unless it was a hot afternoon, and then there'd have been people around to see her." "Uh-huh. Since she talked to you, did she ever say she didn't feel safe someplace, or maybe thought someone was following her on her route?" "No," he said it blandly, but then the question really sank in and he gave me a startled glance. You're not investigating betting, are you?" I held a finger to my lips and nodded. "Hey, I've got to get back to my horses and jockeys. I swear some of these guys are higher strung than the runners. But tomorrow we aren't scheduled. You can come around the stables there if you want to talk to more people." Getting the invitation was handy and I thanked him. That didn't mean he was innocent, though. Sometimes innocent people resented even routine questions, and some guilty people acted helpful to try and throw police off. I liked Eric, though, and I hoped I wasn't in for a surprise. The next few people I approached had the opposite reaction to me and refused to talk at all. I could reveal the reason for my investigation and insist, but that would be antagonizing. There were at least 60 men back here, not all local, so not all suspects. But if I got disruptive, none of them would have a cooperative attitude. The real culprit might not have anything to do with racing or not be at the track today. I was heading for the trailer for Paradise Meadows when I heard Brown's voice raised. He'd been stopped by a couple of men at the walkway from the stands. One of the men was the one who had let us through on seeing my badge. Brown pointed to me and I heard him clearly say, "I'm with the officer, remember? Or did you fall off a horse one too many times?" The guy took a swing at him. I was already running for them, but as fast as I am, that fist only had about 4 feet to travel, and it made solid contact with Brown's face, sending him staggering back against the walkway rail. Keeping in the shade of my umbrella did not help with my speed, but the gate access to the field was covered, so I could drop it as I closed in. The other guy looked like he was eager to get his own shot in, but I'd accidentally pushed him aside as I grabbed the gatekeeper by the back of his jacket, got his wrist, and twisted his arm neatly behind him. "That was assault and battery," I told him, "and you're under arrest. I hope you weren't planning on riding today."